Alright, time for another draftphysics.com video presentation. So, unfortunately, like when I started this channel, when I started talking about physics from, 10 years ago, yeah, some people just couldn't care less, so they really don't want to hear how science is flawed because, yeah, they're voting for it. And I could argue that I was sort of in that category. I like science. I've watched, all the science shows, and I found documentaries about science interesting. All that British stuff with the animal crap, and then whatever his name was, who did the Cosmos thing on public TV and all that crap. So always been interested. Uh, always, I kind of worked in mechanical fields, and you had to kind of understand why things did what they did. I mean, I fixed cars. I did different things. Worked in a machine shop. You had to kind of understand why it was easier to machine steel than aluminum and all this kind of stuff. So I've always kind of been, you know, it's always been how I looked at the world. I mean, I never looked at the world in any other way except kind of in a scientific way. Like I'd ask the question, just as a kid, I remember, I was on a golf course that just happened to have these little schools of catfish, little tiny ones, in this little tiny stream. And so, yeah, I asked the obvious questions: how do they get there? And then I ask, why are they in a school? As fry. Because it just seems like it makes them easier to see and easier to catch, and you think something bigger could just pick them off. Anyway, I asked the question. I didn't even come up with. I still don't have a good answer for that one, frankly. I mean, it just looks like it's just makes it easier for a predator to whittle you down. But anyway, obviously it doesn't work. Somehow evolution is saying it's better. But anyway, side subject. So I'm just saying I'm not clearly not anti-science. But the sad truth is, first I found out that most people just aren't interested, even though they claim to be atheists and this and that. They really don't want to do this. It's because I guess it's a lot of detail that gets lost in, and maybe the fact that it's gotten so broad in terms of it's not a simple thing anymore. I mean, entanglement and superpositions and all kinds of fancy jargon, and they've turned it into where you don't even speak English. I mean, all the symbols are bizarre and strange, and they don't even represent anything physical. So yeah, it's sort of gotten disconnected from what any average person could get involved in. But anyway, I made this separate channel because people just most people aren't interested, which is in itself a sad and defeating realization. And then the people who are interested, sadly, are really not interested in any kind of fair fight or argument or getting to the truth. They just want, their revered politics, their political party to be protected from the evil outsiders attacking, And, that's all it's about, is protecting a position of power and authority, not recognizing that maybe some mistakes were made, and conceding that it needs to be tightened up and cleaned up, to make no concession at all to the argument that maybe scientists has jumped the shark a little. They've put the horses before the cart and jumped to conclusions based on fragments of evidence, not even close to anything you'd call a proof at a trial, and start talking about their nail in the coffin evidence and how it's indisputable and how it's the way it is, and so I don't get all of that, frankly. And I suppose my bias is the fact that I don't find what science is doing to be very satisfactory as explanation of reality. Like Einstein, I'm sitting here and saying this just sounds like religion. It just sounds like a bunch of woo. Spooky action, ghosts and angels. It doesn't, doesn't sound like physics. That's for sure. Doesn't sound physical, and it's innately okay. Um, yeah, it's a Smurfy. It's a cartoon almost. It's a fable, happily ever after. It's silver lining. This sounds like concepts that come out of the religious minded, not out of the people who are saying, it looks like the world looks pretty processy. Okay, the process of evolution. It looks like there's just processes, and they're just, they're already written processes. It's like almost the free will debate. There's, a whole group of scientists who just can't accept that we don't have free will, and so they have to come up with compatibilism or some kind of wacky notion that it's okay to think you do, even if you don't. Because somehow you need to, or somehow your brain won't work if you don't, which I don't understand. Again, I'm sitting here saying I'm a programmed robot. I'm just doing my, what the program says. I mean, I've been in a world, it's banged into me. It bangs into me a certain way, and this is my honest, reaction. And I can tell you, people will say, they can make accusations that I'm doing I have some agenda. No, my agenda is merely to defend what I think the truth is, and that's what I'm doing in making these videos. And there's no other agenda. I don't wish to win any cheat wars. I don't wish to unfairly fight. I don't think I have in any way. I haven't written poems about where people live or any other kind of crap. I haven't attempted to extort anybody out of making videos or exercising their right to express themselves on the internet in any way. So it's just all such bullshit. So anyway, I've made these, more than a dozen 5-minute videos on these specific pieces of reasoning and evidence that are substantially involve the theory that there's a thing called kinetic energy, this 1/2 mv squared stuff, and that momentum isn't the controlling mechanism in the universe, that this kinetic energy is. And it's an old theory, and one I would say right from its beginning was poorly reasoned and poorly evidenced, and it remains so hundreds of years later, and nobody will respond to that stuff. So I've offered over 50 channels payment to play one of my videos, play one of my arguments, and respond to it. And I haven't been able to solicit anything from any of the channels that have some viewability, some exposure, and nor the scientists that once in a while you find one, a physicist, a retired one in a couple of cases. They have kind of nothing channels. They don't seem to have much to do, but you can't engage them in the argument because all they wish to do is instruct you, okay, on how they do physics, and they really don't want to defend the physics they do. So that's not part of what they think science is defending your position, defending your argument. You are sending the truth to the gas chamber, so to speak. I mean, this is a serious trial. Reality is a serious thing. Getting it right and not having it wrong can't be logically understood as not important. It's really important to have right answers, not wrong answers, to these fundamental, elemental, foundational questions. It does make a huge difference in how you understand your existence if you understand yourself to be a robot, a programmed piece of shit, that was created, all right, by a culture and an environment that maturated you and that you didn't have much to do with anything you became. It was all based on what you're mimicking and what you're copying, and what through experience you learned to discount or discredit. And frankly, you didn't have anything to do with it. But anyway, it is important. These are important facts that create an understanding of what it is to be human and alive, and what your obligations are, and what you're ethically involved in, and what you're ethically and mandated to give a shit about, and all of that crap is decisively going to be decided by this understanding. So anyway, so the simple truth is they're defending a religion. It's not a science. It's easily debunked in some cases, and certainly easily shown to be way under evidenced. And they just keep selling it hard, okay? Is if you're anti-science or you're a flat earther, this is what I have actually been called now by PhysicistMichael. I'm just as bad as a flat earther because I don't believe nonsense. And that's all it comes down to, in the sense that it's nonsense to believe things without good evidence. And in 350 years, they haven't compiled anything as a document. There's nothing on the table, okay? They have a table that has their evidence on it in this case, and all they have is one single little isolated experiment and nothing else. I mean, nothing. So I guess I might as well go through a little tiny bit of that first, and then I'll get back to the video. That seems the reasonable thing to do. It should disappear. Yes, it did. All right. So the contest is, and again, I didn't start with this as a problem child for me. All right, this formula. Okay, this came up much later. I didn't even realize that they had a thing called KE that was different than momentum. I really did think the universe was momentum, and I really didn't pay any attention to any KE idea. It just never even occurred to me. And then I incidentally banged into the fact that science believes this is the truth. 1/2 mv squared instead of just the mv part, the Newtonian part. And then I found that they were just overtly lying about who Newton was and what Newton believed and what Newton's second law says, and they just kept saying that Newton says F equals ma, okay, not mv, but ma. Okay, and this acceleration thing was some sort of scalar thing and not a vector thing, and you have some excuse to square it for some reason, that somehow your acceleration is squared. Now, what I found in doing the research is that Leibniz, the only reason why Leibniz believed, okay, in this idea was just because of this distance thing. So he wasn't paying much attention to what Galileo discovered, in the sense that all he was saying is that, well, if you're going 4 times the distance, that must be 4 times the work. It must be 4 times something, and that's it. That's as far as it went. And the truth is that you get 9.8 meters per second here. You're going half your velocity here, okay, here, half your velocity. So obviously this and this, okay, make up what you're doing. And it's the same is true for this little fall here. The little fall is doing exactly the same thing. It's falling half its speed right here. Okay, you can barely see that. All right, so it's a huge fact, and it has implications to when you're rolling things. They do the same deception. I don't know if Leibniz made reference to rolling objects, but he might have. I just don't remember. But it was as simple as this. He just saw the distance and said, well, it's 4 times the distance. Who cares about the fact that it's only twice the velocity, and it's only twice the time, and it's only twice the weight? We won't pay any attention to all that evidence that it's 2. Okay, we'll just do this 4. We'll just count distance. All right, even though Galileo explained the distance thing, this is accrued velocity, okay? You're just accruing velocity quadratically. you keep adding extra, but you're not getting more force. You're not getting pushed more. You only got pushed twice here, you know, in the sense that per second, if this was 2 seconds, you only got 2 units of the force. That's why you're only going 19.6. I mean, this is the simple logic. All right, so so that's sort of the context, is that, yes, I said I looked at this equation and looked at the consequences of it, and what they were saying is that all I have to do is put energy in light things, okay, and I can make free energy, essentially. Because if I put the energy in a heavy thing, I'll really lose energy, because it's all about velocity, it's not about mass. And frankly, no. And then, you know what the real giver away was? You know, somebody wrote a book about bowling, and physics says the lighter ball knocks down twice as many pins. And, you know, the whole idea of that seems so anti-evolution, right? I mean, as evolution proves certain strategies must work better over time, because it's in the, you know, the proof is in the catfish pudding, so to speak. The catfish wouldn't be in a school if it didn't work. And the proof is in the fact that no professional bowler is using an 8-pound bowling ball. I mean, it's supposed to be twice the power, you know, and yet no bowler can find that power. So those kind of little facts just sit out glaringly saying, yeah, bullshit. And then so you research and you find out there's nothing, okay? So as I stated, they have one experiment. One you know, experiment that they do in isolation, frankly, and they claim this proves it. Now, even though it doesn't work, okay, with cars or Newton's cradles or anything else you really use, except when you do it in your little experimental lab on an air track, for example, and you bang a 1-mass cart into a 2-mass cart, and you have a spring in here, right? And the spring seems to be vital. So one, you know, kind of disreputable bonehead has conceded that when he takes the spring out and just has them kinetically, you know, elastically collide, metal against metal, like a Newton's cradle, it doesn't work. So you really do need the spring. And then, you know, they do this experiment, they end up with this free momentum, in the sense that this has 100 momentum going in, and this can have up to 200. But let's just say, as in this example, if we use a 3-mass, it's 150. So I've gained momentum in a direction without anything. The box, the experiment, 100 goes in, 150 comes out, and the experiment's not supposed to be adding any energy. And, you know, so you have this simple experiment, they do it, but do they ever do this? Do they ever put the 6-mass here? And, you know, the 12-mass over, you know, 18-mass here? Do they ever increase it and say, well, I should be able to keep creating more and more momentum? No. So that doesn't work. And again, do they ever do it with a simple device like a Newton's cradle to prove it? No. So it's only in this special little way they do the experiment, you know, and claim that's all you need to believe. Now, their theory says, okay, you know, if you want to go twice as fast, twice the velocity, you have to have 4 times the fuel. Okay, so you have to use 4 times the gas to go twice as fast. If you want to go 3 times as fast, you have to use 9 times the fuel. You want to go 4 times the fast, you have to use 16 times the fuel. And they're also arguing that if you're doing any of these speeds and you hit a brick wall or something, you're going to do 4 times the damage, or 9 times the damage, or 16 times the damage. Now, they have no evidence of this either. So all the cars they've crashed and all those car tests and, you know, all the, you know, ways that you could simply do this fuel economy thing, twice the velocity, 4 times the fuel, there should be some evidence of that somewhere, right? Nothing. Zero evidence. They don't have anything on the table to show you saying this actually happens, except this experiment. This is it. This is all they have. Not a single incident, not in space. They can't show you it happening in space, where you know, you just shoot bullets, you know, little tiny balls of little bullets out the back of your spaceship, and you go much further than if you shoot bowling balls out. That somehow, if I throw a cannonball 1 mile per hour out this side, okay, and I throw a cannonball, I throw 1,000 cannonballs 1 mile an hour out this side, you know, better put the 1,000 so you're not confused. And I put 1 going 1,000 over here. Okay, that somehow, okay, this has 1,000 times more energy, 1,000 times more watts went this way than went that way. And they just glibly say, well, no, it doesn't do anything. It doesn't mean anything. No, thrust doesn't have anything to do with energy. So, yeah, I mean, thrust moves things in space, and yet it's not energy. I mean, you know, and then they'll use relativity arguments, all kinds of convoluted nonsense. Now, I've made this argument over and over. I made these arguments. Different ones of these arguments have been done over and over. I've consolidated them into 5-minute videos and requested somebody to make a counter argument, and nobody will play those flat earth pseudoscience videos and point out how I said anything wrong, incorrect, flawed, stupid. Okay, nothing. Not a single one of these people who will debunk religious people, and they'll debunk flat earthers, and they'll debunk free energy nuts, but they won't debunk me. Even though I'm willing to pay them to do it, they won't do it. Why? And the simple answer is because they can't argue the argument. They can't counter-argue because it doesn't make any sense. The fact is, if it's 1,000 times more energy going out one side of your ship, that's the same as heat. And thermodynamically, you have no choice but to move the spaceship. But they know it doesn't happen. They know it doesn't work. And they don't care. Because they don't care about the truth. They don't care about fair fighting. They don't care about having the argument. They just care about winning the election. They don't care about what happens to people. They don't care about what the social policy involves as a long-term consequence. They don't care how unsustainable it is. They're just going to sit there and sell it because that's their team. And their team is just a religion. It's just a defense of flawed crap because they can't give concession to reason and point out and accept that, yeah, they never really tied this up. They never really repeated the experiments. They didn't do enough experiments. They never really tested it. They didn't do what scientists are supposed to do, is they're supposed to collect the evidence and then well argue the evidence. And they weren't willing to do either one. They're not willing to collect the evidence, and they're not willing to argue the evidence. They're despicable cowards defending a religion. You know, that it's like the medicine man. You know, they have an advantage in being a pretentious scientist. You know, they have some kind of free respect. And they don't want to lose it by you finding out that the only thing in that magic bag is a bottle of aspirin. You know, that there is... The medicine man don't have no mojo. All he has is deception. All right, and that's all they have. They really haven't done science. All right, so I'll play some of this video of physicist Michael from 10 years ago, 11 years ago. You know, and I could talk about how his life has changed since then, and you know where he lives, and some other kind of crap. But no, I'll leave that out because it's not relevant. Amazing. All right. Anyway.
Light, as described by quantum mechanics, they're saying that there's so many of these that...
So this was his summation of this idea of what the goal of physics is. So he's sort of talking about, like, this is what us scientists do, and this is how we... And so he uses Newton, okay, and doesn't point out that, well, Leibniz rewrote a big hunk of Newton, right? I mean, Newton is sort of diminished completely in the sense of their rewriting of the second law. It's not Newton's physics they're defending. They're defending Leibnizian physics, and they don't even mention Leibniz's name here anywhere. All right, and then Maxwell is the beginning of wave etherists taking control and saying, see, we own the territory. Then Einstein came along and he said, wait a minute, you know, that ether shit certainly isn't working because he did the whole photoelectric effect. But at the same time, he created his own big ball of woo called a space-time. A bent geodesic is controlling gravity. So a huge Jekyll Hyde kind of thing in Einstein, in the sense that when he looks one way, he doesn't have woo glasses on. When he looks the other way, he puts them on. There's a duality, okay, a particle wave, a woo in science part of Einstein, where, somehow he can see through the woo of spooky action, but he can't see through the woo that's all this relativity theory is spooky action, spooky frames. You can somehow jump, through time, as if it's a three-dimensional space when it's a no-dimensional function. But anyway, and then the E equals mc squared has this little, velocity squared thing in there, and all you really need is m times any preposterously large number, because there's no way to even calculate gigantic numbers like that in terms of a tiny piece of mass having a bunch of energy in its most rudimentary or fundamental state, and that the energy is essentially stored as mass. But the fact is that if you went to go extract it, you're not going to be able to. A non-moving electron has a mass, but it doesn't have any energy. Let's see. So it's really just a statement, in my opinion, about how much energy there is per square tiny speck in the universe. So if you just take the whole universe and calculate how much energy it has, it'll come out to some number. It's not really mass times, it's a cube of, a cubic millisecond billion thingy, a tiny plank. You could just say a Planck amount of space. Alright, so it's almost like doing drift velocity. E equals mc squared is almost like some sort of drift velocity calculation. It really doesn't have anything to do with any particular object, how much energy it has. It really just has to do with where, if you average the whole universe over all the space in the universe, how much stuff is moving. How much movement is there? Alright, and then the whole quantum thing, we get into this, that's a further step into this wave particle thing, but it's even worse in the sense that it's turning real mechanical momentum events into, randomized something or others. Some kind of, like Feynman. Okay, Feynman's a good example where an event takes place, and you can deduce that there must be some mechanics to it, just like throwing dice on a table, and that it's just that we can't do the calculation. So there's no way for us to be able to experimentally see all of the variables and calculate and account for all the variables. So the outcomes are unpredictable merely because we don't have enough information. And so instead of accepting that, they just say, no, the universe is playing dice with your welfare, and somehow everything can just poof into a condition, and it doesn't have to mechanically go through a process to get in that condition. It just poofs into it. Alright, well, anyway, so that's this premise, and then he talks about a more simple idea of what science is.
We really need to, that we can just ignore the particle effects of light and just deal with the wave effects. In this approximation, Maxwell's equations work out perfectly well, but if we're dealing with individual photons...
Well, they never work out perfectly well. Let's just understand there's always conditions. It only works if this condition, that condition, so there's always conditions.
Well, then we have to go to the quantum picture. So that kind of shows how the process of physics is a process of successive approximation. We start...
So that term is just so useless. I don't even know. It's Feynman said it more simply. You guess. All you're doing is guessing. You guess and then you test your guess. That's it. There's nothing else to the process. You sit there and write down a lot of, you're solving a crime, and you say, well, these are suspects. I got the butler's wife, blah, 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 blah. I got these suspects, and now I'm going to figure out who did it. And so you can, through process of elimination, you can figure out which things couldn't have done it. And you just keep trying to do, guesswork about how it's possible that, well, even though he has an alibi, the alibi could be a lie because that's his best friend, and blah, 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 blah. So, you can do all this deducing to try to figure out what's the right answer. But yeah, it's just made out of guesses. And, you look at it, you see what it does, and then you try to figure out what the catch is. There's a reason why springs make this experiment happen more often than no spring. Now, I don't know exactly what the reason is, but I think it has something to do with the fact that, most forces that we call a force are moving the speed of light. I mean, they react very quickly, like a magnet, for example, reacts very quickly. It doesn't need any spring time, okay, because the little force bits that are doing the action are all moving the speed of light. So it doesn't compress or expand at any rate, okay, except essentially the speed of light in terms of applying the force back again. Where a spring is mechanically confined, it's got to move coils and they have to re-expand, and so it has a very limited expansion speed. Maybe it has something to do with that, but they won't even engage in the conversation. That's not a physics subject, whether springs do something different. But anyway, it's a side subject in a way. But it just shows how they're really not interested in the science. They don't want the truth. They just want the outcome, the conclusion. They want a justification to believe in something silly. And that's all it is. And so it's just like religion, believe in God and the Jeebus and all this silly crap, burning bushes and whatever else. And, the sun stood still and, frogs falling down from the sky, all kinds of bullshit. Believe it. Believe God done it. God cursed them. God cured them. God did it. And this is the same thing. They just want to believe in this little woo-averse.
Start with the simple system and then say, how can we describe more and more effects? So there's two sides of physics which are essential for coming up with good theories.
A guess. And then testing the guess. That's what I would write. Guessing and then testing the guesses. So I've attempted to test their guess. Okay, their MV squared guess. So it's not a guess anymore. It's just, they've inherited it from granddaddy. Granddaddy said so, so they're going to say so. It's an old, archaic, really archaic, silly guess. And everything about it is flawed. From the clay experiments to Leibniz's belief in solitons. I mean, huge, giant, pustules are connected to this story. It is not a clean story. It's a very dirty and filthy and diseased story. And they won't even talk about that.
First, we have the theory side. So people coming up with equations that they...
So again, equations, as if this isn't about a mechanical system. You don't talk about how automobiles work by just throwing equations at somebody. You show them the cylinder and you say, look, this is how much space it's compressing. And as it compresses the gas, it gets hotter and hotter and hotter. These are the rules that the thing runs on. Okay, that's what you do. This isn't just math.
Believe describe the real world, and then just as important,
the guess. Okay, so that's Feynman saying guess. Okay, and then test the guess.
There's experiment,
and it's all conditional, right? Einstein pointed out that all you need is one experiment that says no, and you got to stop, and until you fix that experiment that says no, you're stuck. Okay, I mean, you're in some trouble. Now, I wouldn't say it's, there's no such thing as one experiment saying, it's decisively can't be the answer because, you just don't understand why it's that one experiment. Like I said, it has a mechanical spring or it has something in it, some catch that makes it come out that way. Again, it's a valid question to ask. I mean, why would you bother with air carts? Why would you bother with little carts and all that crap if you could just do the experiment with a Newton's cradle? I mean, this simple experimental device, if this simple experimental device, your math says it should happen, and it doesn't, I mean, that should be one of these points where you pause and say, well, maybe I shouldn't be selling this idea until I can figure out why it's not happening here.
And the experiments are, okay, let's go out into the real world and set up an experiment such that we can test whether these theories are right.
And there's lots of experiments you can do, right? So there's more than one way you can test this stuff. So you can use levers, or you can use gears, or you can use catapults, or you can use all kinds of different kinds of scales you can build. There's lots of ways you could do the weight measurement. There's lots of ways you can measure the energy. There's lots of ways you can collect it. And they haven't done any of it. Not any of it. They've never even tested a rolling ball down a surface and said, well, can we collect the energy and see how much energy the surface actually absorbs? They've never videotaped the bowling ball hitting the pins and done the calculations. I mean, they could do the slow motion camera thing, right? They could do the calculations. How much energy is going to the pins? Does it add up? Do I get more momentum if I hit the pins with a lighter ball?
And these two both have to complement each other in order for a theory to be good. If you have...
It's not just complement. I mean, obviously, the facts are what you're collecting. So this is just the facts. I mean, these are the facts. Does the guy have an alibi? Could he physically be there? Was he in California, at the time of the crime? There's things that are going to be obvious and things that are going to be more subtle. So there's no... this whole idea, again, you can't be too draconian and say, okay, because it has one little flaw, okay, one thing I don't understand how it could possibly work because it can't do this thing, then you shouldn't be throwing it out. So I could use the argument of drag, all right, because physics knows these truths. I mean, it does seem like electrons don't go through space. You can't shoot one. So we don't get electrons from another planet coming at us at high speed. So something happens to electrons. They don't make it. And I would argue that protons have the same problem, okay? And that the only thing that does this traveling are these nucleuses. You have to have an electron and a proton associated with each other. That's the only machine that can sustain its movement through space. So when you say the idea of throwing a wrench in space and it keeps going forever, yeah, it only works for material things. The irony is the little bits don't do that. The little bits don't go forever. So you have a pretty significant piece of evidence that, this isn't as simple as everything just being a particle and all particles are the same. Because the particles are in two different universes. One of them is below charge. They're the little electrons and protons living in the same empty space we live in. Okay, but they're living in it being smaller than the material bits. I mean, being smaller than the atom anyway. And so it's a different universe in a sense they're living in a sense the elemental universe is its foundational laws are going to be subtly different than the ones that are already combining a whole bunch of matter into a consolidated space. That consolidated space is going to be a different universe than the universe where everything's open and there's distance between everything.
The theory that has no experimental evidence behind it.
So let's just understand, the theory of mv squared really has no experimental evidence behind it. I mean, one experiment, not duplicated with other mechanisms, doesn't show up in anybody's personal experience driving their car, certainly. Okay, you really don't use 9 times the fuel going 3 times faster. It just doesn't happen. No evidence from space or NASA. NASA basically, subtly concedes it's not using Leibnizian, theory to navigate. It's using thrust and it's using momentum. It just cares about the momentum of the stuff it ejects from a spaceship. So you have all kinds of counter evidence in the sense that you haven't done with a Newton's cradle. I mean, you haven't analyzed rolling things. You never even analyzed dropping round things into clay, denting clay, and recognizing that denting clay might not be a great way to measure something's energy. That you don't say something has more energy because you put a point on an arrow and it goes into something further. You don't say that somehow the energy of the arrow increased because I put a pointy thing on the end of it. That would be rather ridiculous. So we know the experimental evidence is insanely weak. And yet they tell us it's the absolute truth, and you're a flat earther, you're a science denier if you sit there and critique and point out how the evidence isn't substantial. It's insanely weak.
Well, then it's not going to be a good theory. You have to.
It'll be good enough for you. It'll be good enough for people who don't have any standards and people who want to believe. People who are just voting for the party. They don't want to analyze any subject. Like, is immigration good or is immigration bad or is this, They don't want to think about the long-term consequences. Well, we're basically decided that we're going to always have slaves to pay Social Security taxes, right? So we always have to increase population because it's the only way Social Security works. Some kind of dopey idea that you're not for, and yet you're voting for it because your party says that's the solution. I mean, everything has a consequence, right? I mean, moving to electric cars, right? So you do the real facts and figures and you figure out, well, you don't have enough lithium, you don't have enough this, you don't have enough that. It's going to get expensive because it's going to get very rare. And then on top of that, you don't have enough electricity, frankly. Everybody can't plug their car in on the same day or the whole grid will collapse. I mean, stupid things that people never considered. You're going to have to spend billions of dollars to upgrade the telephone poles, and they're all going to have to be made out of steel because the wires are going to get heavier and heavier. That's kind of crap.
In order for a theory to be good, you have to have an opportunity for it to be testable or for it to be disproven. So
duh. I mean, but that doesn't change anything. Anybody can make up a story. Okay, I could make up the story that Bugs Bunny controls the universe, and he's got a bunch of levers he's pulling all the times, and he's deciding our destiny. Okay, yeah, it's completely unprovable. It's kind of silly and nonsensical, and it's not much fun, and it's just hurts your brain to think about it very hard. Where does he go to the bathroom? What does he do? Who built the sewage plant? I mean, you can think of all the infrastructure problems. Anyway, so anybody can propose something. Yeah, and if it's wacky, it's wacky. But somebody could propose something very scientific in the sense that they could be proposing a solution that could be very mechanical and consistent, but there's still no evidence because we just can't see it. The microscope won't go that deep, or the telescope won't go that deep. So we could speculate about the end of the universe. Is it a bubble? We could do lots of that, and there's no harm in it. It's just that it's just an idea until you can prove it. So I think it's legitimate to call it a theory, no matter what. And the real question is what you call a fact. So the fact is you don't call it a fact until you've proven it.
Let's say I do an experiment and I see some strange effect in nature, then they'll say, okay.
I see some strange effect in nature. Well, I'm just saying, if you're trying to prove a theory, then it wouldn't be strange. So yeah, lots of times you accidentally, like Faraday, you accidentally fall on some stuff. Okay, you're turning the electricity on, you're waiting for something to happen, nothing happens, and then you realize every time you turn the electricity off, something's happening, and you say, "Whoa, what is that? Something's happening when I'm turning it off." All right, so it doesn't happen when I turn it on. I didn't notice it, but I do notice it when I turn it off. Okay. And so it makes you look somewhere else and you get to find something new. So a lot of experiments are just discoveries where you accidentally fall upon a fact, phenomenon. And then there's a case where you're trying to prove something. So let's say you're trying to prove mv squared, and it basically says, yeah, it takes twice the force to go twice. It takes 4 times the force to go twice as fast. Well, why don't you show that somewhere? Why don't you show you pouring more fuel in? Why don't you show you compressing the spring 4 times as much? Or why don't you show where you had to apply 4 times the force to get twice the velocity? All right, that would be your obligation. Or 9 times the force for 3 times the velocity. And they don't do that. So they talk this talk, but they don't walk the walk. Not even close to walking the walk. If you say I can bang a light thing into a heavy thing and get free momentum, then why don't you just show it in Newton's cradle? One of the cleanest experiments you can do, in the sense that it conserves the energy very well. The energy stays in the system for a very long time. So you can do the experiment and see it go, more than once. you know.
I'm going to send that over to the theorist to try to say, how can you develop a framework such that the results of this experiment make sense? And the theorists will work on that for a while, and they'll say, I've come up with a new theory.
They'll contrive an answer. So this happened with Einstein, actually. So Eddington, thought Einstein's work was interesting, and so Eddington was quite aware that there was a problem with Mercury's orbit, and so he challenged Einstein to apply his physics to the problem. And what did Einstein do? Well, he got together with Mach and some other mathematicians, and they just spent months trying to contrive mathematics that would suit the circumstance. And you could argue that it's really contrived mathematics. It's so complicated. Nobody barely, right, they would say could understand. That's the part they said people couldn't understand. Well, yeah, because it's so convoluted and it's abstract. He's creating whole new tensor things, whole new kinds of mathematical jargon. And one could argue that all he really did in all of that crap was process the sun itself. That all that was really accomplished is that you just conceded that the sun itself is processing, and anything really close to the sun will feel that procession, and anything far away won't notice at all. And that could simply you can use that simple logical explanation, or you can keep the more complicated one that says, well, light has to move twice the speed, be bent twice as much by gravity, and this has to happen, and all these other crap that has to happen that they really don't have any evidence of.
This theory predicts some strange effect that maybe you guys haven't been looking for yet.
I'm just saying you guys haven't been looking for it yet, right? I'm just saying it's so obvious. This is just such duplicity and hypocrisy for these people to talk about looking when they haven't looked at all. They haven't tried to defend particle physics at all, okay? They say, well, we thought of everything and we can't figure it out. Feynman actually says this in his lectures. He's basically saying, look, we're really smart. We've thought about it and we can't figure out the answer, so there must not be one because we didn't think of it. It's that silly.
The theory will say, maybe you should look for this other effect that I have predicted, and that'll go back to the experiment side.
So again, one of the effects that Einstein predicted was light being bent twice as much by gravity. So to explain Mercury's precession, he had to create this formula that basically said light has to be bent twice as much. Now the funny thing is, in 1917 or 16, his theory was that no, the light would be bent the same amount. So they were going to do the eclipse experiment, but the war got in the way, so they didn't do it in 1917. And by 1919, Einstein had changed the theory to 2x, the bending. So it is kind of funny that the confirmation would have been a completely different argument if they had done the experiment 2 years earlier. And the fact that they've never repeated it, and the fact that Einstein did jump, he basically said, well, everything's fine because God's happy because I'm right, kind of bullshit, when he knew the experiment was flawed. He knew it wasn't a very good data that they collected, that the weather was horrible, that the pictures weren't very good, and this was a very hard thing to do in the first place. So a very hard experiment to do, very difficult, and they had almost everything that could go wrong went wrong.
We'll be able to look for that, and this kind of interplay is really the way that good physics is done.
Right, and it has nothing to do with the physics this guy's doing or, physics is doing in general. They're clearly afraid of argument, they're clearly afraid of evidence, they're clearly afraid of making any kind of speculation about how they might be wrong, that there might be a simpler answer. They don't want to hear it, they don't want to defend their position, they just want to pretend it's all pseudoscience and some attack coming from some evildoers that are attacking their beautiful scientific religion, their God theory.
You need both theory and experiment. If you do an experiment and can't explain it, then that's not a very good situation. But
And if you can explain it with convoluted jargon and mushy talk about vague experiments, oh yeah, well we sort of analyzed it and it came out our way, and then we sort of did this and it came out our way, and yeah, we sort of did that and it came out our way. That's all you get. Ask them, well, why haven't you repeated the Eddington experiment from space? And they'll say, well, we got this other experiment where we tied our shoelaces backwards. Isn't that the same experiment? I tied my shoelaces backwards from my usual routine, and I was able to walk. So doesn't that prove that the Eddington experiment is credible? Because I did something completely different and erroneous to that experiment. Doesn't that prove it? No, not quite. I mean, they're such liars. I mean, again, the big lie of stealing Newton's ideas and remolding them into Leibnizian ideas and pretending it's still Newton when Newton directly opposed it. I mean, stuff Newton directly opposed. I mean, if he could dig his way out of the grave, he'd be pissed the fuck off because you're not doing his science. You're doing somebody else's and putting his name on it. He'd hate that. Pretty damn sure he'd hate that.
But if you have some picture of the universe, but
That's my theory, that he would hate being misrepresented.
no way to check whether or not it's actually accurate, that's also a serious problem. So in order to do good physics,
So again, they're talking good physics. I just played a Dr. Lincoln video when he's telling you that electrons and protons are relativistic objects moving in a wire, blah 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 blah. All this wacky crap, and he's saying it's a fact and it's the truth. When no, it isn't. You haven't proven that.
you need both theory and experiment. And this is
So whatever, you need theory. You need to make guesses, and then you need to test them. And the test should be rigorous, is the whole point. And it should be fair. Some people shouldn't be given a pass on doing their tests, and other people required to prove everything, right? I mean, everybody tells me I have to do all these experiments that physics hasn't done. So even though they have the trillions of dollars, and it is trillions of dollars by now, millions of scientists, hundreds of thousands of laboratories, all of this stuff, they won't bang two metal balls into each other. They won't do shit to defend their physics.
hopefully provided at least a reasonable idea of how these revolutions in physics have come on.
And again, revolution, they're not really revolutions, frankly. They're just consolidation points. There's points where somebody consolidates. I mean, Maxwell was obviously not a revolution. It was just a consolidation of different elements, okay, that were done separately, and he just put them together into a set that, used one to defend the other. And then you could argue that, in this period, they did the same. They also took something as simple as like the work equation and contrived it to match, the Leibnizian notion. So before Maxwell, they had already perverted the whole idea of what work is, and consolidated some idea that we should all pay attention to distance and we should not pay attention to time. That forces aren't about how long the force is applied, the force is about how much movement it causes. Alright, so anyway, I'll play a little bit more.
Because they've been driven by experiment viewing the motions on the Earth and the motions.
So again, no experiments. We don't even have like space shuttle experiments, right? There should be a whole channel just devoted to all the experiments they could have done from the stupid space station and the space shuttle, right? And what do? They throw a tennis ball. You know, they could do all these experiments. They could take, you know, they have a perfect environment. They could launch things with springs. They could do all kinds of experiments. Do we have anything? Nothing. What do we get from the moon, right? They dropped a feather and a hammer. And that's what other experiments do we see done on the moon? Oh, and they jump up and down. Is there any real science being done? No. It's pathetic. It's absolutely pathetic.
In the heaven, or viewing the effects of electricity and magnetism. Going back to the theory side, how can we describe those strange effects together? And then returning to experiment to try to find.
And again, they haven't shored any of this up. The ideas are completely incompatible. Quantum mechanics doesn't fit with Einstein's bent space at all. The two theories are mechanically disconnected because, frankly, bent space is a silly idea. Okay, it's non-physics. It's not physics. We know that the gravity is happening for a reason. There's something causing it. There's not nothing causing it. You're not bending nothing to cause gravity. You have to be bending something. And frankly, you're not bending anything. It's clearly everything's just pushed. You know, it goes on and on. I mean, you get into all this, you know, entropy arguments and, you know, some kind of big confusion about how did the universe anti-entropic? Well, because gravity exists, that's how. The reason why it's not all flying apart is because it's all clumping together. Shit, that one's not a hard one to answer. I mean, it's all these fake things. You know, particle wave duality. It just, particles can wave. Waves can't particle.
New phenomenon to study and new ways to understand the universe around us.
Yeah, blah, blah. New ways. It's not new ways. It's old ways. And they just keep building on top of mistakes. Again, they never even fix the wrong assignment of plus and minus. And it creates, in Maxwell's equations, absolute bullshit, where the current is going one way and the voltage is going the opposite direction. When they know it can't, that's not true. Whatever's happening, it's going one way or the other way. It's not going different ways. Alright, so that's it. Alright, so maybe we'll just leave it at that. So, I might play some of his videos from his college channel, you know, his professional channel, you know, as a physics instructor. Anyway, but yeah, it really is irritating to be, you know, the personal attacks for no reason, again, and for why would he endorse that crap? Why can't he just recognize that these are physics arguments and he should make physics arguments and the people in the comments should make physics arguments? Why can't that be part of this? Okay, I'm not saying, okay, all slanderous and lying and privacy invading poetry should be outlawed. Well, yeah, it probably should. But can't any of you stay on the subject? I mean, you can't respond to 5-minute videos? I mean, what, I gotta make them 30 seconds long? How long do they have to be for you to say you can handle it? But again, no arguments. I mean, those videos have been for 2 months now. I have begged for somebody. Is there anybody in this audience who is a physicist who thinks physics is done right and physics is done well and we have really done our science well? Will any of you show the courage to just play the video and explain where I'm making terrible mistakes? Oh, God, it's just so gutless. This is worse than an argument with creationists, okay? I mean, I've argued with creationists and religious kooks. And they don't cheat as much as these people, these science defenders, are despicable cheaters. I never had a religious guy worry about getting into my private life or making all these other, you know, side arguments and all this other crap. They just either said, well, I don't have an argument. God is God. God is love. You're just missing it. You know, Satan owns you. Some kind of stupid remark, and that's the end of it. But they don't get personal. But you point out that science might be less than science, that it might be something worse, a lot worse, okay? That it wasn't so disciplined, it wasn't so careful, and it doesn't deserve the cred it's claiming it owns, the territory, that it's done its job when it really hasn't. It just, painted the dead grass green. All right, anyway. Blah, 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 blah. It's all rhetoric. We haven't, they just won't do what physics should be. All right. I wonder what the fuck this is. Let's see. Why is the 2x4 getting smaller and smaller? Oh, well, that is... yeah, because people can get away with it. It's like asking, why did people bite pieces off of coins? Anyway. So anyway, till the next time and such and so forth and whatnot. This really is disappointing. To live on a planet where even the smart people are dumb enough to be unethical cheaters.